Testing. There we go. Well, good evening. Hope you guys are doing well tonight. We are. Seems like we've been very hit or miss in our main series for the last few weeks. We had a week we had spring break we didn't meet, and then we had the next week that stormed out, and then we had 1 week, and then we had last week we did the Tenebrae service as we were heading into Easter. So we've kind of been hit and miss the last few weeks as far as our series. Just to remind you where we're at, we are tonight looking at 2 Kings. 2 Kings, as we continue our series on the story of the Bible. For some of you who were paying attention to the news or what things were going on in the 1980s, it was on this day in 1985 that one of the, some people might call it one of the dumbest things corporate America ever did. Today was the day that New Coke got introduced, back in 1985. How many of y'all remember New Coke? Some of you should remember that. I mean, that was a big deal, you know, the whole Coke wars and Coke versus Pepsi, and Pepsi apparently was making headway, so Coke decided to do, hey, we're ahead, but let's sabotage what we got, and they changed their formula to what they called New Coke, and that lasted, maybe about 3 months, something like that, and they went, yeah, this was stupid, and everybody went, yeah, we knew that. And somehow Coca-Cola recovered. So one of the dumbest things I think, I was reading about that day, I want to go back and read all that. Yeah, that was just one of those dumbest things any corporate CEO ever did was let's change our formula that everyone's like for 100 years and just, you know, make it more like the competition. When we get to 2 Kings, you know, Israel is dumb. Israel's being stupid here. Now, in many ways a whole lot worse than New Coke was. Obviously, this is the people of Israel, as we come to 2 Kings, are making bad decisions, or at least the kings are making really bad decisions. As we talked about a couple of weeks ago, when we come to 2 Kings, it really, 1st and 2 Kings are really meant to be one volume. They're just essentially divided up for ancient purposes of one part of it fits on one scroll and part of it fits on the second scroll. But as it's written in Hebrew, Kings is one volume. And so from 1 Kings chapter 1 to 2 Kings chapter 25 is one continual story meant to be read together. And as we go throughout the story of Kings, what we're doing is we are bridging the gap. We're bridging the time in history that runs from the end of David's reign as king and the beginning of Solomon's reign all the way through to, which is, you know, that's dating to the mid-900s BC, all the way through to the 560s BC. So we're talking nearly 400 years of Israel's history is taking place in the volume of 1st and 2nd Kings. And what we'll see as we get to the end of 2nd Kings in particular tonight, that one of the things that's happening is that these two volumes are working together to say this: the exile, the Babylonian conquering of Jerusalem and Judah, and then before that, in the 700s, the Assyrian invasion and destruction of the northern 10 tribes called Israel. They're justified, and they were coming, and this is why. And so what these two volumes are doing is they're showing us how the decisions that Israel made, especially their leadership made, and what the people of Israel did, earned every bit of what was coming through Babylon and King Nebuchadnezzar and through Assyria and the 700s. So that's the big picture of what's going on here. We're obviously going to get into a little more detail than that. There are some fairly well-known stories that take place in these two volumes, but of course we're tonight mostly going to be working in 2 Kings. So we're there. Let's begin with some prayer, and we'll jump in. Heavenly Father, we're grateful tonight that you have, through the centuries and through the years, had your word, your purposes written down for us. Lord, as we read these scriptures, we are reading not just historical events, but we're reading a revelation of who you are and how you have worked through history to make yourself known to Israel and, of course, eventually to us this evening. So, Lord, would we be paying attention? Would we be willing to learn and to be shaped by what you are making known to us? In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So again, single book. This book is connecting the covenant that God made with Israel through Moses, the covenant that God made to David, to the events of this history and the history of Israel. It's also connecting the promises that God made, especially to David, to Israel, to the events going on. And it will justify, ultimately, the exile to Babylon. You do have, if you have a note sheet, you do have a bit of an outline that will take you at least through the major movements of 2 Kings. Just the first chapter or two is essentially the transition from Elijah, that main prophet that we hear of in 1 Kings, and of course his conflict with Ahab in particular and Jezebel. And we have the transition from Elijah to Elisha. And it's always fun to try to say those two things back to back, Elijah, Elisha. And so 1 Kings chapter 1 and 2 will take us through essentially the early quick transition and launch us into the era or the ministry of Elisha. From there, in the next few chapters, and really through chapter 8, you get a series of accounts and stories that deal with the prophet Elisha and his role in the life of Israel and that northern kingdom in particular. Starting in chapter 8, you've got really, from chapter 8 really through chapter 17, the stories of any number of kings, both in the southern kingdom of Judah and the northern kingdom of Israel. There's wars, there's civil wars, there's battles, there's political intrigue. If somebody wanted to do a mini-series on this, especially by the time you get to chapters 14, 15, 16, 17, we'll look through some of that. What you really have is this, especially in the northern kingdom, the northern 10 tribes. Here's essentially what happens. Someone assassinates the king. He takes over. He lasts a year or two. Someone kills him. Someone takes over. Someone kills him. Someone takes over. You get the idea. It's a pretty bloody and a pretty bad time for Israel that sets the stage for Assyria, a kingdom to the north, to come in and take over. So you'll have between these chapters 8 and chapter 17, 18, you have a series both of the southern and northern kingdom of the evaluation or even a brief synopsis of any number of kings in the northern and even in the southern kingdom. After that, beginning in chapter 18, and running through most of the rest of the book, through chapter about 23, you'll have focus upon a couple of the southern kingdom kings, Hezekiah and Josiah in particular, who were a rarity. There are two kings who actually, it's said of them, they did what was right in the eyes of God. However, in the end will still result in the fall of the southern kingdom. So let's kind of just begin walking through this. Chapter 2 of 2 Kings takes us through the transition between Elijah and Elisha. You may be familiar with this story. We won't read, it's a fairly long account. If you're familiar with it, what essentially happens is they work their way into the wilderness. They know ahead of time. Elijah does in particular. He knows ahead of time that the end of his time on earth is near. And so he tells Elisha, you're going to be the next guy. But there's a condition. Elisha asks for, let's just go to this here. See if I didn't write the verse down. Let's see here. Well, Elisha asks Elijah for a double helping of his power. Now some will look at that. Yeah, it's in verse 9 of chapter 2. They had crossed over the Jordan River. And when they had crossed over, verse 9, chapter 2, when they crossed over, Elijah said to Elisha, ask what I shall do for you before I am taken from you. And Elisha said, please, let a double portion of your spirit be upon me. Elijah said, you have asked a hard thing. Nevertheless, if you see me when I am taken from you, it shall be so for you. But if not, it shall not be so. Now, if you want a way of getting someone's attention, do that. Basically, Elisha, if you see me when I'm taken from you, you're going to get everything you ask for. If you don't see me when it happens, too bad. Now, do you think Elisha ever took his eyes off Elijah for the next several hours? I imagine Elisha didn't let Elijah get out of his sight. But what eventually happens, of course, is we have Elijah taken up in a whirlwind. So verse 11, right there in chapter 2, as they were going along and talking, behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, which separated the two of them, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind to heaven. And Elisha saw it and cried out, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. And he saw Elijah no more. He took hold of his own clothes and tore them in two pieces. He also took up the mantle, that's a robe, of Elijah that fell from him, and returned and stood by the bank of the Jordan. He took the mantle of Elijah that fell from him and struck the waters and said, where is the Lord, the God of Elijah? And when he had struck the waters, they were divided here and there, and Elisha crossed over. And so what we'll have in these next several chapters are a number of events that Elisha takes part in that essentially establishes him and gives him credibility to all of Israel as the successor to Elijah. There are some quite interesting events there. So chapter 2, chapter 2, verse 23 is the first one that we kind of run into. And at first glance, this is a bit of an odd little story here. So Elisha, he went up from there to Bethel, and as he was going up by the way, young lads came out from the city and mocked him and said to him, go up, you bald head, go up, you bald head. When he looked behind him and he saw them, he cursed them in the name of the Lord. Then 2 female bears came out of the woods and tore up 42 lads of their number. 2 verses. They call him Baldy, and 2 bears kill him. Now, what's this? Again, it's one of those really odd little stories, and it's 2 verses. So what's going on here? One, why did it happen, and why do we know about it? Any ideas? Are these guys just making fun of Elisha because he might be bald? Yeah, there's actually more to it than that. There's more to that going on. So a couple of things here. Bethel was in many ways, even at this point in time, it was a religious center in ancient Israel. Before David, before King Saul, before David in particular sets up camp in Jerusalem, before Solomon has built the temple in Jerusalem, Bethel was one of the early worship sites of the tabernacle and when Israel was first coming in under Joshua. After Solomon, and remember the kingdom divides into the northern and southern kingdom. You have Rehoboam, son of Solomon, and Judah, and you have Jeroboam, who takes the northern 10 tribes into and divides up. And Bethel is where Jeroboam and the northern 10 tribes set up one of 2 different religious sites, altars. And they erect a golden calf, which was meant to remind us very much of what Israel had done when they got out of Egypt. So after the Civil War, after Rehoboam and Jeroboam split the kingdom of Israel in 2, the northern tribes set up at Bethel one of 2 religious sites, altars, to worship this golden calf, and ultimately becomes a big center of Baal worship. So when Elisha is going up to Bethel, he's approaching as a prophet of God an area that's known for as a center of pagan worship. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Second thing, our English translations don't always do a good job here. When it talks, I just read this out of the New American Standard. It says, I said young lads. What do you guys have in your translations of verse 23 for who it was that was making fun of Elisha? Small boys? Some boys, okay. The reality is, while that word can in fact perhaps refer to younger, say, elementary age children, it doesn't necessarily mean that. This word that's used in this verse here for young lads is the same word used to describe Joseph at age 17 when he was sold into slavery. It's actually also used when Abraham in the book of Genesis, remember Lot is in the city of Sodom, his nephew, and there are some foreign kings that come in and invade Sodom and Gomorrah and take Lot and others captive. Abraham kind of gets together a little local army and goes after them, and that army is described as the same word here, young lads. So these were not 10-year-olds going to war. What's probably happening here is these are probably 17 to 20-year-olds. All right. So what we have here is we have Elisha going into an area that's known for its pagan worship as a seat of false gods worship. We have a large group of 17 to 20-year-olds, probably in that category, who are forming a mob. Now, how do we know how many? I said 42. Why would I say 42 of them? Verse 24. How many boys did those bears kill? 42. Now, that may not have been all of them. In other words, this wasn't a bunch of 8-year-olds. This was a mob of dozens of teenagers, probably older teenagers. So one, that's a different situation now, isn't it? Now they say this phrase, "Go up, bald head, go up," or "Go up, baldy, go up." Now, what in the world's going on here? Is Elisha upset because they're making fun of him because he's got a bald head? Well, maybe, but probably not. Let's go back and remember what has just happened in the previous few verses. What did we just read about? Elijah. Now, Elijah has gone up. Now, this has become well known. Elisha has told the story, and this is a well-known thing even by this early time. They know that Elisha has said Elijah got caught up in a whirlwind. So what they're doing is they're referencing that. They're basically telling Elisha, go follow Elijah. If Elisha's been taken away, if Elisha's disappeared, we'd like you to disappear too. And the whole bald thing, if you read through scriptures in various places, but if you go back to some earlier things in 1st, 2nd Kings chapter 1 earlier, we find out that Elijah is known, one of the things he's known for, he was hairy. In fact, there's an account there in Kings about the king of Aram, and he's sending his men out to a false prophet to find out whether he should go to battle or not. Elijah intercepts them and he says, you tell that king, this is what God said. And when those guys go back to the king of Israel, they said, we had some prophet came to us and said this. Well, describe the prophet. Man, he was hairy. Oh, that's Elijah. Elijah was known for being hairy. And so probably what's happening here is this. Elisha is most likely less so. But what's happening is essentially they're saying, you are not your master. Go follow him. Leave us alone. There are pagan undertones. There are false prophet undertones. We know there was actually a school in Bethel that was training in the pagan religion. It may well be that these are young men who are being trained as prophets and false prophets in this false religion, who don't want anything to do with the prophets of God, and who are mocking and who are essentially threatening Elisha as the successor to Elijah. So this is actually a much more threatening, dark episode than what it might first appear. And, don't mess with the prophet of God, even if he's bald. That's, But what we're doing here is we are establishing Elisha and establishing that God has remained present and active in Israel and in Judah, despite the fact that the majority of the people and the leadership have abandoned God. And this is going to be one of the things we're going to see throughout this course of 2 Kings, I think, maybe even more so than 1 Kings, is we're going to see this idea that despite the nations turning away from God, God's still active in maintaining a presence with his people because he's made a promise to Abraham, to Moses, and ultimately to David. Chapter 3, 4, we got some battles and some things going on. We're gonna move on past those. At least at the moment we are. I'm gonna get back to them actually in a minute. One of the other themes of we see often in the Old Testament and in the history of Israel is that Israel, of course, saw itself, and it rightfully so, as God's chosen people. God had, from Abraham to Jacob and Joseph and Moses and all, God had clearly chosen Israel to be his unique people, and he was going to accomplish something unique in history through them that you and I, even this evening, are benefiting from. Now, in the course of all that, in the course of all those promises, in the course of all that, the goal God had told Israel was, even when he made the covenant with them at Mount Sinai after Egypt, was that they would be a people that would uniquely belong to him and would in fact make him known to the nations around him, to the nations around them. They were to be a unique people that stood out. They were to be unlike anybody else. And so they were to, through their unique faith, through the way they obeyed that faith, through the way they lived in their society, and the way they interacted with those around them, they were to point people to the one true God. And you will see in so many of the Psalms of David, this idea that Israel is a shining light and the nations are drawn to the worship of God because of Israel and come to Israel and come to the mountain and they worship God. So Israel always had a missionary call, if you will, as a nation. Now, Israel didn't see it that way. Israel, unfortunately, came at least to the practical conclusion, if they didn't really just mean to do it, they just kind of came to it. They focused on the chosenness aspect of it and forgot the mission aspect of it. They liked the idea they were chosen, but they didn't really so much like the task they were chosen for. And so not only do they often, of course, worship false gods, but they don't do a very good job. In fact, they actually resist the idea of making God known to the nations. You'll see this, for example, in the story of Jonah. That's all. We'll get to that later. I don't want to spoil that surprise, but you'll see that in the story of Jonah. Jonah doesn't want to go to another nation. Well, you see here, you see a reiteration in chapter 5 of 2 Kings that there is supposed to be this theme throughout the people of Israel's life that people, the foreigners, the outsiders are drawn in to God. And we have the story of Naaman in chapter 5. You may remember the story of Naaman. Naaman is a Syrian. He is in the nation that eventually will conquer the northern 10 tribes of Israel. Naaman is a high-ranking commander. He's a 2-3-star general. He's up at the top. He comes down with leprosy. And, of course, we know that day and age, you come down with leprosy, that is a death sentence, and it not only is it something that will eventually kill you, you are isolated from the rest of the society because of how contagious it was. So Naaman comes down with leprosy. He has a servant girl that he has captured who now serves him, who is from Israel. She tells Naaman's wife about a prophet in Israel who could heal him. Long story short, Naaman comes to Israel, and the first thing he does is he sends a messenger to the king of Israel, and basically says, in chapter 5, Naaman's got his facts a little confused. So he sends a message to the king of Israel and says, I understand you can heal me of leprosy. I'm on my way to heal me or else. And the king of Israel is going, I can't do that. Word gets out. It's Elisha he's looking for. They send him to Elisha. Elisha shows up and says, here's what you need to do. Go to the Jordan River. Dip into it 7 times. You'll be healed. Naaman goes, that's a stinky, dirty little river. Why can't I go back to Syria and do stuff up there? Naaman's servant's going, dude, this is not a big deal. Just go into the river. And Naaman, of course, is eventually healed and converts to the worship of Yahweh. So in this, the point of the story is it's reminding Israel, reminding us, even though Israel itself has by and large abandoned God, God is still going to use even someone like a servant girl to bring the nations to the worship of God. We have a missionary purpose for Israel reminded this is who Israel's supposed to be. After the story of Naaman, we get to a number of different stories. Chapter 4, the end of chapter 4. And these are going to be reminders to us that God is faithful. And so chapter 4 has a number of things. One is you have some of these miracles are very similar to things that Elijah had done. So chapter 4, you have the story of a widow woman, and she owes money. She can't make a living. She's in trouble. She sends to Elisha for help. Elisha tells her, well, let me just read that for you. Elisha said to her, verse 2 of chapter 4, "What shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house?" And she said, "Your maidservant has nothing in the house except a jar of oil." He said, "Go, borrow vessels at large for yourself from all your neighbors, even empty ones. Do not get a few." So get a lot. "And you shall go in and shut the door behind you and your sons and pour out into all these vessels, and you shall set aside what is full." So she went from him and shut the door behind her and her sons. They were bringing the vessels to her, and she poured. And when the vessels were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another vessel." He said to her, "There is not one vessel more," and the oil stopped. Then she came and told the man of God, and he said, "Go sell the oil, you pay your debt. You and your sons can live on the rest." She had nothing to her name. She owed money. She was in trouble. She go get as many empty jars as you can, and take the one jar of oil you have and just keep pouring it. And from that one jar, she fills umpteen dozens of however many jars. And he said, "Okay, now go sell it and make your money." Very similar to a miracle that Elijah had done in 1 Kings, where the woman and the son, all they had was just a little bit of flour, a little bit of oil, and the miracle is, for a week, she just never runs out. It uses more than there. It's a very similar thing, reminding us that God is enough. God will take care of those who are His. Verse 8 of chapter 4, you have the story of what we call the Shunammite woman. Her son dies, first the Shunammite woman wants to minister to Elisha. She makes a room for him. She makes a little Airbnb, in modern terms. Makes a little Airbnb for him. Elisha stays there.
maybe it was a 596, but that's what it is, that's what he did. He's put in prison, put in jail, he's a trophy. And then, all of a sudden, he's taken out of there, given a throne room, given a budget, treated like royalty. What's happening? This is how the book ends. I would venture this. Kings as a volume is written, obviously it has to be written after that moment, after 561 BC, even though the material probably dates back older than that. What's happening, I believe, is this. You've had 400 years of history, most of which was pretty bad, from a spiritual point of view. And as you're reading all this, if you get to chapter 24, 25, and you're reading all this, you're going, well, this is just the end of it. God has abandoned Israel. They're captured. They're in captivity. They don't exist as a nation anymore. The Northern 10 tribes have ceased to exist. All hope is gone. Then the last few verses just say, oh, by the way, the king has been released. He's been clothed in royal robes. He's been given a throne. The end. It's just a brief, I think, a brief little promise. The story's not done yet. There's hope. There's that thread, whether it's the floating axe head, or whether it is the cure for the death of the pot, or it's the oil for the widow woman. Through all these kings, through all the idolatry, through all the discipline and punishment that Israel has in fact earned, there's a glimmer of hope. God is not done with his people yet. The end.
Makes you want to stay tuned through the word.
There you go. It is. I will say this. That's 400 years of history. Later on, we are going to get to what we call the prophets, the big ones like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and all those minor prophets that you all don't probably read very much. Amos, Obadiah, Nahum, Habakkuk, all those guys. Most of those prophets are writing during this time that we're just talking about. The vast majority of them are working, and they're in that northern kingdom before it's destroyed, and they're working in the southern kingdom. So all this period of time, 800, 700 BC, 600 BC, those prophets are working and doing their thing. So when we go back and look at them, we'll see some things happening in more detail to fill in the blanks here. Jonah, obviously that happens before 722 because Israel's still a nation, hasn't been wiped out yet. So all those are happening at the same time. So we're going to Chronicles here in a couple of weeks, and Chronicles is going to fill some blanks in for us as well, because Chronicles kind of covers the same era of history, but it includes some details we don't otherwise have, and it's taking us a little different. It's letting us know some information we don't otherwise have. So there's hope. There's hope. All right. 200 years of history in 45 to 50 minutes. One quick note here. Most of you know that the egg hunt got canceled due to rain, due to rain Saturday morning. We are going to make another attempt at it. Right now, the forecast for Saturday is for rain, so what we're going to do is we're going to do it next Wednesday night. So we're calling it an extra special Wednesday. Come on, laugh, that's fine. So it's an extra special Wednesday night. We're going to put out another set of flyers to the school, all that type of thing. Odds are we won't have do the same crowd on Wednesday night we would have had this past Saturday morning, but we're going to do all that. So what that means for us next Wednesday night is this. We're going to do that at 6 o'clock. We're going to do the bounce houses. We're going to grill the hot dogs. We're going to try to do as much as we can. So we will not be in here next Wednesday night for Bible study. We're going to be doing the extra special Wednesday, all right? So I encourage you to come, grab a hot dog, hang out with the kids, hang out with mom and dad, whoever we can show up. And let's have a good time over there. So that's from 6 to about 7:15 next Wednesday night, all right? So if you're watching online, we won't be here next week again. So it will kick back in here. If you are watching with us online tonight, thank you so much. We'll hope to see you on Sunday. Y'all have a good evening.